Okay, everybody, good morning. Welcome to the special meeting of the Environment and Sustainable Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee taking place today, Monday the 14th of February 2022. I am Councillor Bev Cole, Chair of the committee, and to my left is Councillor Jonathan Elmer, Vice Chair. To my right is Diane Close, Overview and Scrutiny Officer. Can I remind members that the meeting is being broadcast through our YouTube channel live, please? Okay, I would like to extend a warm welcome to members of the committee. Oliver Sherritt, Head of Environment, Stuart Priestley, Principal Ecologist, Jim Corkill, Chair of Environment and Climate Change Partnership and Director of the Durham Wildlife Trust, and Chris Woodley-Stewart, Chair of the Ecological Emergency Workstream of the ECC Partnership and Director of the North Pennines AONB Partnership. I would also like to welcome any members of the public or media who are either in attendance or watching the live broadcast of today's meeting. Before we commence with today's formal business, I would like to cover some of the housekeeping issues for us all to follow, please. Could I please ask everyone to switch off or make silent their mobile phones? And when invited to speak, please switch on the microphone nearest to you and introduce yourself. Concerning asking questions during the meeting, if members and co-optees could clearly raise their hands, please, to indicate that they wish to ask a question, I will make a note of the names and then read them back to make sure I have not missed anyone. If I don't read out your name, can you please inform me using your microphone and I will add you to the list. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the agenda. Item number 1, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies for absence, please?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillors McAloon and Stubbs. Thank you.
Thank you. And item 2, substitute members. Do we have any substitutes, please?
Yes, we have Councillor Sutton Lloyd for Councillor Stubbs.
Thank you, Jill. Okay, and declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest, members, please? No? Okay, thank you. Any items from co-opted members of interested parties?
None, Chair.
Thank you, Diane. Okay, moving on to item number 5, consideration of an ecological emergency. Members, you will find a report and presentation on pages 3 to 52 of your pack. I would now like to pass over to Jim Corkill, Chair of Environment and Climate Change Partnership and Director of Durham Wildlife Trust, Stuart Priestley, Principal Ecologist with DCC, Chris Woodley-Stewart, Director of North Pennines AONB Partnership and Chair of the Ecological Emergency Workstream of the Environment and Climate Change. Thank you, Jim, Stuart and Chris.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Technological advice. Yeah, just to say, my name is Stuart Priest, I'm the Principal Ecologist at Durham County Council. Unfortunately, Jim hasn't arrived yet. We're hoping he's okay. We're hoping he's just stuck in traffic. If he does, we'll insert him at an appropriate moment. So obviously, hear about the consideration of an ecological emergency. There's been a report, which you've all seen now, which was an update and refinement of the presentation I gave previously. The key issues from that report were essentially that we've accepted that global and national biodiversity loss, and that report provides information on the local situation, some local data to inform your decision making. There are a few updates since the previous presentation. I've been in contact with various other bodies, including the university, which was a specific request, and there's been further contact with the sort of Durham Bird Club, reptile recorders, amphibian recorders and butterfly recorders, just to make sure they're happy with the tone of the report. We did get some further information through prior to this presentation being put together from the Teesdale Special Flora and Conservation Trust regarding the Teesdale assemblage. Now, the Teesdale assemblage is a unique collection of plants in Upper Teesdale, specifically on 2 fells. It's been there for about 10,000 years since the last glaciation, so it's a really important and unique assemblage of plants. There has been some data which was provided. So it was surveyed back in 1968 to 77, and again in about 2000 to 2010. So you've got a 30-year period there. And on average, you had a 66% decline in species abundance for 5 key species on the 2 fells where the Teesdale assemblage is present. So that's a 66 average decline. On one specific fell, they surveyed between 1968 and 1975. Now, that was 19 species in total on fixed quadrats. and then it's been resurveyed again in the last few years, and there was a greater than 50% decline in the number of 10k squares of species were present in. Okay, so you've got, so you did take 10k squares and there was a decline of 50% in presence absence. I don't tend to take very long over the next few slides. They're just the headline pointers of the report, which you've all seen. So we obviously monitored designated sites, and we showed condition assessments for SSIs and local wildlife sites, and there's a very high percentage of those were in poor condition, upwards of sort of 70%. Ancient woodlands were 77% in poor condition. Then we also looked at the Water Framework Directive, which is the EA's data. That directive is a legal mechanism by which you have to get your water courses and water bodies into good condition. And the basic data there is 94% of the Weir catchment fails to meet that target, and 85% of the Tees catchment fails to meet that target. There's also information on birds as well. In the report you'll have noticed there's a little bit more information about special protection area birds on the Durham coast, turnstones, showing the declines there. Reptiles as well, did some work on reptiles. I did contact the local reptile recorder just to update the atlas, and he believes that the reptiles are still declining, so he doesn't see much positive news there, and he thinks the grass snake is now probably extinct. Then we looked at the mammals and the butterflies as well. So again, no real updates on the mammals particularly. That data remains pretty much the same as you had before. The butterfly data changed a little bit. There's a bit more information on dingy skippers there, a more up-to-date report, and a bit more information on grayling. But again, the overall picture is exactly the same as was presented earlier. Then bumblebees and the salmon and sea trout, again, very little change in the data that I presented before. You've got forgot 4 locally extinct species of bumblebee, and we've got one lost from the lowlands of the county. That's still present in the Bombus muscorum. It's still present in Teesdale and Upper Weardale, where you've still got some quite nice little meadows and patches of habitat, but from the lowlands that went extinct locally in about 1970s. Good news on the bumblebees, we did find a new species fairly recently, the tree bumblebee, and that's colonised right the way through the country. It's very much a generalist species. You may have read in the report that a lot of the species that are declining, those specialist species, are ones that require high quality habitats. They're really declining badly. The tree bumblebee is expanding across the country, but it'll be pretty much found anywhere. Urban gardens, agricultural land, it's quite a generalist species. And again, the salmon and sea trout data, that's not changed particularly either from the report. So essentially you've got an indication of declines of fish moving into the 2 rivers, the Tees and the Weir, and there's also an increased risk of failure for meeting conservation targets for salmon on both those rivers as well. I think now I'll pass over to Chris.
Thank you very much. Remember to take my mask off, the disappointment as you get to see my face then. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me along. I'm Chris Woodley-Stewart. I'm Director of the North Pennines Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty Partnership. And in a Durham context, I chair the Ecological Emergency Board of the County Durham Partnership. I'm really sorry that Jim's not here. I hope he's okay, and I hope he'll be able to join us soon to get his input to this. There'd be no point in discussing the idea of an ecological emergency and talking to you about decline if we couldn't do anything about it. And if we'd all been sitting on our hands all this time doing nothing, you'd have a right to ask why. But there's actually lots of really good and important things going on in the county. And it's the same with the climate emergency in a way. If everybody only talked about doom and gloom, the public would switch off. Because if you tell them that there's no hope, then there is none. But there's loads of good things happening. I just want to pick through a few of them, if I can make the IT work. So, you live and we work in an amazingly beautiful county. Fantastic uplands, really important species-rich upland hay meadows, a wonderful coastline. It's been absolutely transformed in the last 25 years. I'm contractually obliged to show you a picture of High Force Waterfall every time I stand up and show pictures to people, so there's one. But world-famous, fantastic rivers, incredible bird life, not as abundant as it was, fantastic woods, and it is just beautiful. And beauty is really important in inspiring the public about what we can do about nature. So I just want to have a look through some of the good things that are going on for biodiversity. On the Durham Heritage Coast, they've restored 12 miles of fantastic, unique coastline, and behind that coastline restored 160 hectares of grassland habitat. And they're also working really hard expanding nature recovery out into the marine environment. We don't think about the marine environment, but actually the marine environment off the coast of Durham is really important and special. It's also worth highlighting the Seascapes project that Durham County Council is leading on, doing that work, taking nature recovery out into the marine environment, working with the National Trust, the Heritage Coast Partnership and the Wildlife Trust. We have in the North Pennines, in my patch, which is, I don't just work in Durham, in Cumbria and Northumberland as well, 40% of all the species-rich upland hay meadows in the whole of the UK, that's 4 out of every 10, is found in the North Pennines. If we're not doing something about them, who is? We've surveyed over 1,000 meadows, we've restored 200 hectares. That's double the resource that we started with, working with farmers and contractors. It's a hugely important habitat, it's really culturally significant, and it is one of the big emblematic things about the North Pennines. The County Council, working with Stuart and the Clean and Green team, working on council-owned green spaces. They're enhancing grasslands in those places, and we forget about grasslands. We talk about woodlands, we talk about rivers, we talk about wetlands. Grasslands are tremendously important for nature. 41 hectares converted to species-rich grassland, managed better for biodiversity. You've got a great Clean and Green team doing really good work. The Rivers Trusts, small charities, we work with them a lot. The Tees and the Weir Rivers Trust, they're working on good soil management, managing metal mine pollution along with ourselves and the Environment Agency. There's a picture of metal mine pollution work at Killip. They're working on riparian tree planting, keeping rivers cool, which is really important for biodiversity. They're dealing with invasive and non-native species. And they're working really hard with the farming community on how we manage agricultural diffuse pollution, because that's one of the things that's had a significant impact on nature. In my own team, we've been restoring peatland in the North Pennines. So peat is our best natural store of carbon. It's like a little OXO cube of concentrated carbon. And there's more carbon stored in the peatlands of the UK than in the forests of the UK, France and Germany combined. It's a little super powerhouse of carbon. But it's also really important for biodiversity. So our team in the County Durham part of the North Pennines has restored 16,000 hectares. That's the same as the size of Newcastle, so it's a big piece of work. And you can see from that picture, that aerial shot of some of our work above Killip, just the scale of what's going on there. The avoided carbon loss is enormous. It's like taking 2,800 cars a year off the road, or the emissions from 400,000 homes. That's just the County Durham part of the work that we're doing. And it's hugely beneficial for wildlife. It's hugely important in taking the spikes out of flooding and the colour out of water. There's lots of work going on to expand tree and woodland cover. The County Council is really leading the way in some of this work. Lots of different partners focused on this. The County Council is leading things like the Durham Woodland Revival and the Durham Woodland Creation Programme. They brought 500 hectares of woodland into accreditation schemes. They're running the Urban Tree Challenge Fund. The North East Community Forest is active in restoring and putting woodland back out into the landscape, especially close to where people live. My team's working with the County Council on expanding woodland in the A68 corridor. We've just put in a bid to something called the Trees Call for Action in the North Pennines to try and really boost our capacity to work with private landowners. We only work with private landowners to put more woodland back into the landscape and to manage what we've got. You've got a really active wildlife trust here, and I can maybe say this louder now. Jim's not here, I won't embarrass him. The Wildlife Trust, as well as managing 27 nature reserves across the county, is leading some really big and important projects. Heart of Durham is about restoring arable and forestry to semi-natural habitats. They've done a huge amount of work on the small pearl-bordered, do you know I can never say small pearl-bordered fritillary. On that, hugely important work for that butterfly. Was going extinct in the county, now isn't. The Brightwater work is really, really special, and I think on a national level, that wetland restoration programme working towards something called the Great North Fen. If you go on the train between Darlington and Durham, and you'll see that area of flat wetland, that's where they're working there, to really make the most of that wetland area for biodiversity. And they're working with partners to restore the water bowl. Now have a good close look at that water bowl. I want to talk a little bit more about water bowls in a few minutes. I don't have another slide, so do keep that in your mind. Arguably the biggest nature conservation project in the country is Tees Swale Naturally Connected. It's a partnership between the North Pennines O&B team and the Yorkshire Dales National Park Authority. It's not a very imaginative name because it's in Teesdale and Swaledale, but it is doing important things, restoring peatland, restoring hay meadows, managing rush with farmers, creating new small wetlands in the landscape for raiding birds. We're planting 200,000 trees, improving water quality in the Tees and rivers in the Yorkshire Dales across 200 kilometres, and improving fish passage, initially on the River Greeter, with the Tees Rivers Trust. It's landscape scale work. It's doing things as big as we can. This is a piece of work over 850 square kilometres, working with 300 farmers. That's the kind of scale we need to work at. We're running our funding programme in the North Pennines for working with farmers on boosting nature recovery and people's access to nature, which is really important in this context. We'll probably invest £1 million in the County Durham part of the O&B in the next 2 years, out of a £2 million programme, focused on nature, climate, people and place. So far we've been working on things like you can see on the screen, river restoration, walls and hedges, grasslands and more. We're working on training and skills. How will we upskill the farming community to do some of this work? How will we bring new people into this industry? So we're working on knowledge exchange between farmers and conservationists. We're helping farmers understand the public goods that they deliver and assess their own habitats so that they can benefit properly from the new agro-environment schemes that are coming along, which will be so crucial for nature recovery and for farm incomes. We're training contractors. We don't have enough. And they need to broaden their skills, and they need to know that there's going to be a lot of this work, so that if they want to invest in a new piece of kit, that there is actually money coming down the line to pay for this stuff and make it worthwhile in their business. We all do work on volunteers, we're all developing traineeships, and we're all doing a huge amount of engagement through citizen science. We've had 2 big citizen science projects in the North Pennines called Wild Watch, and the other was called Cold-Blooded and Spineless. It's about invertebrates. They've generated 40,000 new wildlife records. They've run over 300 training events for the public in recording and managing wildlife. And that community input has been tremendously important. All of the things, what we need here is interest, care and action. These things are growing, but they come from enjoyment and discovery. And they start with stories more than they start with statistics. There's a huge amount of really good work going on, engaging young people particularly in their environment in this county. Now, that's a lot of the good stuff. I don't show you this slide as a comment on where it actually comes from. This is a slide of gamekeeper kills on one Scottish estate between 1837 and 1840. This is not a comment on gamekeeping in rural Scotland in the early years of Queen Victoria. I show you this because the sheer number of things that were killed in this 3 years, 63 goshawks, that's unimaginable, 27 white-tailed eagles, 198 wildcats. I'd be surprised if there are 198 wildcats left. An enormous amount of predators, ospreys, eagles, 48 otters, it's incredible. 285 buzzards, it's remarkable. And what's really remarkable about this is not the numbers of things that were killed, it is the sheer enormity of the life that must have been in that landscape underpinning that many predators. And lots of them are specialists. If you leave out the hooded crows, there's only 11 foxes. There's only 2 magpies. They're the generalists. This is full of specialists in niches, in an absolute wildlife-rich landscape that would have been the same round here. And now, it's not anywhere near that. It's not even close. The amount we have lost is astronomical, and it is shown by just the wealth of predators that were there. And they're just the ones that were killed. So Stuart has talked to you a bit about the state of nature in the area, but I just want to emphasise a couple of things. We've lost 60% of our swifts. You all know what a swift is, don't you? We've lost 60% of our swifts. When I moved into my house 20 years ago, there used to be 30-odd swifts flying around my street every spring. I have watched that decline with great sadness, and there are only 4 flying around our houses this year. And it's just declined and declined. Next year we may have none at all. There's been a 34% decline in swallows. We'll soon be looking forward to welcoming swallows back as a herald of spring. You're familiar with a swallow. Everybody's familiar with swallows. 34% of our swallows have declined in your lifetime. Hedgehogs. When was the last time you see a lot of hedgehogs? So a couple of you see a lot of hedgehogs. I see a lot of hedgehogs because I've got them in my garden. It absolutely doesn't mean there are a lot of hedgehogs. That slide's partly up there to tell you about something called shifting baseline syndrome. So because we think we see a lot of something, we think there's a lot of them. I've got 4 hedgehogs in my garden a lot of the time, a little family of hedgehogs. None of my neighbours have. I don't know anybody at work that has. 95 out of every 100 hedgehogs have disappeared in your lifetime. 98% of turtle doves. Water vole, ratty from Wind in the Willows. We're all familiar with Wind in the Willows, I'm sure. Some of you are familiar with water voles. If we went back in time and I took you to 100 places when you were kids where you could have found water vole, and then we came back now and we went to those same 100 places to look for them again, you'd only find them in 3. That's what 97% decline means. That's what a stat like that means. 3 out of 100. One of our most loved species. 54% of all farmland birds gone. 29% of our birds are on what's called the red list of species of conservation concern. These are not just things you haven't heard of. This is the house sparrow. This is the starling. Are now on this list of species of conservation concern. Now, were this a football match? I do squeeze a football analogy in pretty much everywhere, whether it's wanted or not. Nature and we would be 5-0 down. Without the wildlife trusts and the A&B partnership and the rivers trusts and conservation-minded farmers and landowners and the county council's work, it would be 10-0 down. We can and must fight back, because this just isn't about nature for nature's sake. We are absolutely reliant on the natural world for our physical and spiritual health and well-being. Utterly reliant, and we've become divorced from it. And we live at a time where we know more about it than we've ever known, and yet we are more divorced from it than we have ever been. We need to connect habitats at a massive scale, the biggest scale we can, and connect people with nature. Everywhere, in towns and cities as well as in the wider landscape. We need to make smarter, wiser planning decisions. We need to manage the county council needs to manage its own estate for nature as best it can. It needs to up its game for biodiversity in the fantastic way that it has for climate. You're national leaders around climate change in the public sector. Can you get there with biodiversity too? You need to understand your supply chain. What impact is it having on biodiversity? We're failing because the political will to reverse declines in nature has not been there, and these declines are catastrophic. There's been a failure globally, nationally and regionally, and a lack of leadership on an epic scale. It's great that you're placing such attention on biodiversity and have the chance to, in your deliberations, decide what you can do about it and whether the declaration of an ecological emergency will really put it right up there on the agenda as you have so well with climate. People don't like change, they like tidiness. Nature doesn't like tidiness. We build things in the wrong places, we manicure and spray every grass verge, every hedge. I had a parish council say to me a few years ago, I won't say which one, when we talked to them about a verge conservation programme, we've got enough wildflowers, thank you. No, you haven't. I assure you, you haven't. But that's the attitude. Some people think that, and they're so wrong. We're so far past just conservation. We're in a period of recovery of nature. Yes, we have to conserve what we have and build out from the best places. And even if County Durham was an absolute paradise for wildlife, which I assure you it isn't, it would still be, in my opinion, worth declaring an ecological emergency, because you have to conserve the best and build out from there into the wider landscape to recover what we have lost and conserve what we have. We won't notice these things slipping away. They will go out with a whimper. They'll just disappear. You'll look up and you'll think, God, all the swifts have gone from around my house. Stuff just will slip away. I'll finish with a little story. But other than to say the Ecological Emergency Board of the County Durham Partnership is really supportive of the declaration of an ecological emergency, and they wanted me to pass on my thanks to you for giving this such serious consideration. When my daughter, who's now 22, was little, when she was about 3, I said, what do you think I do at work? And she had a little think, and she did a little trot around, and she said, shopping and dancing. I wish. And when she was 6, I asked her what I did at work, and she said, my daddy saves the wild. No, I don't. I wish I did. I'm trying. Stuart's trying. Your Clean and Green team are trying. The Wildlife Trust, the Rivers Trust, conservation-minded farmers and landowners. We are trying, and we are failing despite our fantastic, in many cases, efforts. We're all failing. We are inextricably linked to nature for our physical and mental well-being and for our economy, which relies in large part on clean air and water and a supply chain of pollinating insects, good soil. Really like to thank you for your time this morning, and naturally we're here to answer some questions. We really hope Jim will come along and back us up, but I'm really, really grateful for your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you, Stuart. Members, I'm sorry that Jim hasn't turned up. What we'll do, we'll open it up to questions, and fingers crossed Jim may turn up. We'll see after that. So, members, if you'd like to ask any questions, if you would like to raise your hands, please. Okay, I've got Councillor Sutton Lloyd and Councillor Adams. Councillor Sutton Lloyd, would you like to go first, please?
A really good presentation, passionate as it should be. One question, a lot of the surveys go back lots of times and such as, how confident are you that some of the stuff you may not have looked at recently, it's exactly the same? I do expect that you will say the answer is yes.
Yeah, all the data we've got shows those declines. I mean, as I mentioned in the report, the Atlas data, you have to take the Atlas, what the Atlas states as the publication date. Beyond that, there isn't any further hard data that's within the reports. However, I have spoken to the sort of local specialists about whether they feel the situation is the same, and that my comments based on the Atlas within the report are accurate and give you a good understanding of the situation, and they're all broadly agree with that statement. There's nobody disagrees with that. So I think the general statements that within the atlases are continued to this date. There's been no big reversal in the status of our bird populations, our reptile populations, our mammal populations. Nothing's had a massive great turnaround. Within it, as Chris says, there's been some really good efforts. The small border fertility managed it. That is turning around. There's been a lot of money and a lot of effort put into that, and landowners are engaged with that process. But I think even with those successes, you need to bear in mind that the distribution abundance of that species is still far lower than it was 100 years ago. So yeah, the report is solid and I'll stand by it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Adam, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Eddie Adam, representing Aycliffe West, and I'd like to thank the officers for a comprehensive report, and as Councillor Sutton Lloyd indicated there, the passion to which our officers have put into this particular presentation. Part of my question probably would be directed at the individual that isn't here. Sorry, I forgot his name there. That isn't here, but however, I will still ask part of the question. I was really pleased to see and hear about the positives that are actually going on within County Durham, and I'm sure it's going on throughout the UK as well as globally as well. There are pockets of good stuff going on, but clearly, as the officers already indicated, it's not enough. We need to do substantially more. But what I haven't heard so far from the officers, what is actually missing? What could we do in County Durham that would make a significant difference? What can we do from an Environment Overview and Scrutiny Committee offer you to be able to develop, to expand and to improve what we do within County Durham? I'm not sure whether you'd be able to answer that, because part of that is obviously in relation to the partnership that we're working with in terms of the County Durham Environmental Partnership. Obviously has a big input into that work as well. But I'd like to hear the officers make that, give us some answers if possible, so we can then develop our strategy going forward towards recommendations towards Cabinet. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Adam. Oliver, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I'm very happy to cover some of the basics, and also some colleagues also will have their own views in relation through to it. But sort of starting in relation through to a list, if you like, you've heard this morning in relation through to the survey evidence, and you've also heard that some of those survey evidence isn't complete, but it's enough to tell you that there is a lot of concern there in relation through to our natural environment. So one of the things you would need to include in any plans going forward is actually plugging some of those gaps in our knowledge, because we can use that therefore as a platform to actually guide our priorities. There's a question later on also that covers some real basic things that we should also be doing more of, and that is firstly in relation through to awareness. We have no chance, indeed the presentation sort of like pointed out through to the importance of people experiencing nature and our outdoors, and we have no chance in relation through to having people, society on our side supporting nature conservation if people don't actually have that basic experience with nature. So from a county council perspective, and also of course in collaboration with many other organisations, it's actually promoting those experiences, both from the basic enjoyment perspective, but then also actually building from there in terms of the knowledge. And when you've got those platforms, and our plans would need to expand in relation through to how we're actually going to be doing those things, when you've got those platforms, you can build from there in terms of involvement. Again, the question later on this morning refers through to volunteer involvement, for instance, and that should be a key plank in terms of our work. And then last but far from least is nature itself. Our habitats around this county are largely sort of like man-made, or largely sort of man-influenced, as it were. They are actually tremendous, but many of them actually require active management of one form or another in relation through to really sort of to promote what's the most sort of like special elements of their biodiversity. So I would add that in, and as a county council we've got something like 92 nature reserves, for instance. Could focus on those. We can focus on our parks and open spaces, about getting people engaged more with those. And then again with others, such as the Wildlife Trust, such as private landowners, etc. Be thinking on a broader scale in relation through to the linkages between all of those sites. So those are sort of some of those themes that would come in any plan, and I'm happy to sort of to offer to colleagues any other additions on that, of course.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Jonathan would just like to come in on the back, if that's okay.
Thank you, Oliver, and thanks, Eddie, for the question as well. I don't want to sort of preempt the outcomes of the work that's going to take place further down the line on this. I mean, at this stage, we are looking at whether or not the declaration of ecological emergency is warranted, and there'll be an interim report to Cabinet and then a further report. So those later stages will be very clearly asking that question, what can we do in response? So one of the things that we're recommending actually in paragraph 11 of the report is that we conduct a cross-council review to identify measures that we can deliver in response. And you perhaps be aware as well that the Environment Act requires the council to produce a sort of ecological recovery map. So this is like an opportunity mapping process. So where are all the existing habitats that are of value, and how can we reconstruct the viability of habitats across the landscape by filling the gaps? So if you like, once we've produced that opportunity map, that's going to be a blueprint really as to what needs to be done where. And then of course through cross-council review and the work of all of our partners on County Durham Partnership, we'll be trying to take advantage of those opportunities to fill those gaps. So that's very much a question that we're going to be asking and looking in detail about how we can sort of deploy that sort of support.
Thanks, Councillor Jonathan. Would you like to come in, Chris?
Please, Chair. It's a very good question. This is very much a team game, conservation. There are lots of things that the County Council can do, that it's good things it's doing already, that it can amplify and do more of. It's work around woodland, for instance. It's work around grassland on its own estate. Resourcing and supporting those organisations that deliver out in the wider landscape, the OMB Partnership, the Wildlife Trust, etc., is really important. You know, we work on private land, and that's actually where the future battle, as it were, for nature recovery will be lost and won. But if you're doing all you can on your estate, and farmers and land managers and organisations like mine and the Wildlife Trust are doing all we can in the wider landscape, these things will connect. It is about making connections for nature, making things as big as we can, areas of habitat as big as we can, as well connected as we can, and as well managed as we can. And it is very much a team game, and so supporting those organisations that do that work is important. But equally, as Councillor Elmer said, you will, if you choose to go down this road, be looking at all of the things that you do around your purchasing decisions, your planning decisions. All committee reports at the moment, as far as I'm aware, have to have a comment on for the implications for climate change. Really, in future, why would you not also have implications for nature recovery and for the ecological crisis in all of those things, so that you're thinking about the ecological crisis in all of the decision making that you do, and you're joining it up, because nature's been in a box for far too long. It's been in the box over there marked pretty or nice, or recently the box marked too hard to do. It's not too hard to do, it's crucial.
Thank you very much, Chris. Okay, we've got Councillor Quinn, please.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a couple of things I'd like to want to ask, and one a statement really. I live in I represent Ferry Hill. We have lovely areas of wildflowers and so on. However, more often than not, I'm called to go and look at these wildflowers and then asked to put a request in to chop these wildflowers down. Lots of people like them and want them, but the age-old saying is, just not in my own backyard. How do we educate people to sort of see the actual importance of this technically emergency that we could be heading into? The second thing as well is, you touched on something a little bit there, saying that we could also be doing a lot in our urban areas. Now, I think that's a brilliant idea. Ferry Hill has lots of terraced houses, lots of back streets that are just sat on tarmac and bins out and look, quite frankly, not very pretty. I don't know if this is something within the remit of the committee to push an idea really to have all the back streets filled with planters. Hopefully, I understand the cost of that and then the upkeep, but is that not a scheme that we could run, potentially? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Stuart, do you want to come in?
Yeah, certainly. Me and Chris will both deal with this, I think. Yeah, Wildfire Grasslands, as Chris mentioned before, it runs contrary to the neat and tidy, the manicured nature of our environment, both urban and in the countryside as well. It's neat hedgerows, it's neat grass fields, it's, neatness is the enemy of nature in many ways. I mean, some of the work we have been doing with Clean and Green, converting amenity grasslands to wildflower grasslands, it's a slow process and it's gradual. So you're slowly introducing people to the idea that you can do something differently. So you start off with roundabouts and roadside verges, then you move on to parks and bigger areas. So I think it's just slowly making those adaptations so people become slowly more aware of it. So you drip feed the idea to some degree. You're trying to persuade people that mown manicured is not necessarily the way forward. There is an educational side to that, there's a publicity side, all the work that Oliver does, sort of persuading people to recycle and put the right things in the bins. It's that sort of argument, isn't it? It needs that sort of level of effort to get the message over. Sorry. In terms of the planters and things in the urban areas, that's been done in quite a few places. Near where our parents live in Castle Douglas up in Scotland, just windowsills, shot windowsills with bits of lavender and just little buckets full of little plants and marigolds. It does work and can be quite low key. And I think with all these things, when you come back to the cost of it and the maintenance of it, it's understanding what we're currently doing, what the maintenance regimes are there. And if we changed it, what are the new maintenance regimes? Are we actually, is it less work? For example, to cut an amenity grassland is 14 cuts per year. Cutting a wildflower meadow is 1 cut and removing them. So actually you're probably saving money per annum on your maintenance. So I think some areas will be more intensive if you're looking at wildflower beds in urban areas, but we can save time and energy and money somewhere else. So I think there'll be those sort of arguments about balancing the budgets. But there'll also be an argument going on if you're declaring an emergency, you need to be putting more resource into this. So, yeah. Chris.
Thank you, Stuart. I think your idea for planters is a great one for a couple of reasons. I think because if you go through an area where there is no green, that can be pretty soul-destroying, I think. And I don't think we should be abandoning communities to live in places where there is no green space. So whilst my time is spent out working on the moors and elsewhere, or having a team that does, those urban places are really important. Don't let my fancy name fool you. I grew up on a council estate, and I really feel that that's important, that we make connections with people where they live, because those people make decisions about how we treat our biodiversity. Those people vote. Those people are all crucial. In terms of wildflower grasslands, I do think it's important that we make a bit of a distinction between a wildflower grassland and the sowing of an annual mix of pretty flowers on land that has often had to be sprayed to clear it before those things occur. So you'll have all seen, Darlington's quite fond of this kind of thing. Annuals, poppies, cornflowers, etc. They look great. They're not wildflowers, but they're better than nothing. But then I just want to be clear, they are not necessarily wildflowers, because you've had to spray off the area before you put them down. But in lots of places, if you just let the grass grow, stuff comes up that you didn't know was there, orchids, all sorts of things. We've worked with thousands of school children, and I think the way that you reach people's parents is through their kids. I mean, I know not everybody has children, of course. But to go into the communities and take walks and have events on those grasslands and just get down in them and show all the life that lives in them, you'll never convert everybody. But actually, all the sort of nudge theories say that you only need to move 25% of the population, and everybody will then come with you. To realise that these grasslands are actually incredibly important for nature. They provide green open space near where people live. They're great for soil, they're great for climate, and they're tremendously important. But it is a battle, Councillor, I absolutely accept that, and it won't be overnight. But working with school kids, we work with thousands and thousands of school kids, making this stuff fun, because if it's not fun, why should kids engage with it? And they go home and tell their parents about how important that long grass is, because it's full of butterflies and beetles and whatever else.
Thank you, Stuart. Okay, we've got Councillor Nichols, please.
Hi, thank you very much. I'd like to make just a number of points really before sort of questions. Number one is, again, like when it comes to declarations of interest, it's always it's funny. My partner's an ecologist who's worked with Durham Wildlife Trust and other people, and you are talking to the converted. So that's the first thing here is, you don't need to convince me that we don't need to that we need to declare an emergency. We absolutely do, and there's another number of reasons for that, which you've indicated out really quite clearly and precisely. But I guess really, so yeah, that was my first point. Talking to the converted, I think we need to get on and declare it, because as you pointed out. If this was, if County Durham, if we were the richest habitat in the world, right, on the globe, it would still be important to declare one, to continue to be that beacon, right? So as you've highlighted the fantastic efforts of Durham County Council over the last decade in cutting our carbon and cutting our emissions. The same can be done with the ecology. We can do this, and the really important thing here to remember is that what's best, what's in nature's best interest, is also often, almost always, in our best interest as well. So what's good for nature is good for humans, and we need to take that on. So the ward that I represent, DNS, where I look out outside my window, I'm very lucky. I live in one of the old pit manager's house, right? So you would have seen a pit that employed over 1,000 people, and now what you see is a woodland full of different species, and that's why people want to live now in many places in County Durham, where before we had the pits, we had the smoke, and now we're sort of reclaiming these different places. Nature's taking back, and nature can heal, and if we give it a helping hand, it will do the rest. So what's great for nature is also great for people, and a big problem that we've got is a lack of relationship between people to nature. But where we see people like the Woodland Revival, they're doing fantastic things. They're doing absolutely fantastic stuff in places in my ward, in water houses, for example. Lots of different community activities there, East Headley Hope as well, and it brings people together, and it helps tackle all sorts of different problems, particularly mental health. So I just wanted to say, you're talking to the converted, and I think that Durham and County Durham can really be a beacon for this, and show other places how it's done and the benefits of that. In terms of economic benefits, I hate talking about economic benefits, because I think sometimes we always just care about money, and that's a problem, and that's why we're sort of in this mess, right? But if we look after the environment, and it will look after itself, the amount of tourism that can bring. If you look at the east coast of Durham, people want to visit these places now. More and more people want to live in County Durham as a beautiful place. Look at the pandemic, people are moving out into the countryside. People want to live in beautiful places, and so I wholeheartedly agree with everything that you've said. I think we need to get on with it, and reap the rewards, because these rewards will be for people as well as for nature. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Nichols. I don't know if any... Yeah, Chris?
Thank you for that. I agree with absolutely everything you said there, and it was very eloquently put. There's one comment I want to make about the economy. The economy is built on something that it doesn't value, which is a high-quality natural environment. Businesses recognise they have a supply chain of boxes and labels and whatever else. They rarely recognise they have a supply chain of clean water and pollinating insects. I used to show a slide of a group of people in a province in China, and they're climbing in an orchard through the trees, and it looks like they are cross-pollinating different strains of pear tree. So they're cross-pollinating one kind with another to get a new hybrid. What they're actually doing is hand-pollinating those trees, because pesticides had killed off almost all the pollinating insects in that area. And you can bet your life that it's better for the economy and cheaper than to have pollinating insects doing that job for you for nothing, almost for nothing, than it is to hand pollinate the fruit industry of that part of China. And that's just one example of how nature provides all manner of goods and services for us that we have to value.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Potts, can I just ask, did you have your hand up? That wasn't, yeah, okay. Councillor Potts, please, and then we've got Councillor Lyons, and then I think that's it, unless anyone else wants to.
Yeah, it's for you, Chris, mainly. I know last time I asked the council officers if they thought there was an ecological emergency. Since then, I've went off and spoke to people in the Environment Agency, a couple of other experts who I know were private. Just the same. I know it's going to be an obvious answer to yourself, but none of us professionals at this side. Obviously, do you think there's an environmental emergency, and have you ever met any experts in your field who don't think there currently is an ecological emergency?
Thank you. I don't want us to sort of live in some sort of ecologist's echo chamber where we all sort of get round and congratulate ourselves about how we're certain there's an ecological emergency. We just are. There's just no evidence that anybody could present to the contrary. There is unquestionably a catastrophic decline in nature that will come and bite us hard on the backside sooner rather than later, as a species ourselves. And everyone I speak with and engage with I'm vice chair of our national body, I'm involved in international committees with UNESCO. I don't know anybody that doesn't think that there is a massive ecological crisis, despite all the efforts that we're making. And when my daughter said I saved the wild, I only wish I did, because we just have to get the political will behind this to make it happen. People think that the nature conservation community are not networked and that somehow we could all join up and make stuff better. Everything we do is in partnership. We do all sorts of things together, but we are in a terrible state, and everybody thinks so. And not just out of some sort of, we all want to think so because it'll get money coming into our industry and all that kind of thing. What we do is cause-driven. I get up in the morning to work for this because it's what I am. And it's not just my job. And we all think there is a really serious ecological crisis.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, I've got Councillor Lyons, please.
Yes, thank you. Chris Lyons, Sedgefield Division. Couple of points I'd like to make. First, it's around the articulation of the declaration, because I wholly support the declaration of an ecological emergency, but I think within how that's written and presented, we need hope, because there's a lot of doom and gloom out there at the moment, and it's a tricky balance to strike. And actually, Chris has given me hope that we can do that in his presentation. It's vital that we don't dilute the urgency and the alarm in any declaration, but we need to reaffirm to residents that we really can claw back the 5-0 deficit. And that's just a point I really wanted to make. But sort of linked to that, there's a referral, Oliver referred to communications earlier on, and sort of at a local level as well. And I think, at the time that we declare that ecological emergency, assuming that we go ahead and do that, it would be great to sort of showcase those initiatives that are already happening at a local level, and all members can contribute to that. I can pick out 3 examples straight away from Sedgefield work of the Durham Wildlife Trust, the Discover Brightwater work that's going on in Sedgefield and around the Skern is amazing. There's a group called the Woodland and Wildlife Group that's doing amazing work, and that's all involving local communities. And we should be showcasing those alongside the declaration of the emergency to demonstrate the difference that we can make by acting on that emergency. So I think all members have a responsibility to identify, champion and support action locally. And furthermore, in terms of support action locally, I wonder, I'm sure this will be one of the things that is considered further down the line, but maybe one of the criteria for the investment of neighbourhood budgets should be about addressing the ecological
crisis that we're all facing at the moment. So I think we should fling that into the mix as well.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lyons. Some really interesting comments in there. Do you want to come in there, Chris?
Please, if you don't mind, Chair. I thought that was a really important comment that you made there, because people need to be able to see what they can do, and they need to be able to see what other people are doing it. We need to role model this stuff. So they, community groups can't go out and help to run the next round of the environmental land management scheme, and they can't, develop things like Tees Swale. They can create a local group to look after their local green space. So it's great to showcase the things that we do and the Wildlife Trust does and the county does, but we really need to showcase what local people do so that other local people can think, well, we could do that too. So that is really critical.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't have any other members oh, yeah, Councillor Sutton wants to come back.
Very good debate. I think the thing that come out, I'm already working on a local scheme along these lines. I do take the point. I worry a little bit about, you declare an emergency. Should we not be saying this is an opportunity, big opportunity? Everything that we seem to relate to in every committee comes down basically to education and communication. And one thing I would add to that for this is the basic enjoyment, I think that Oliver said. And I'd like to leave you with a little old Persian quote, which is, if you have but 2 coins in the world, with the first you buy bread to feed the body, but with the second you buy a flower to feed the soul.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Okay, we've got nobody else indicating that they want to speak. Members, I am sorry that Jim hasn't turned up. We do hope that he's all right. If Oliver, you could double check and please pass on our wishes if he's okay. Okay, members, seeing as we're out of questions, can I please ask everybody to agree the recommendation on page 5 of the report? Thank you, members. Okay, we will move on to item number 6, which is consideration of an ecological emergency. Members, you will find the report and presentation on pages 53 to 60 of your pack. I will now pass over to Diane Close, Overview and Scrutiny Officers, who will take members through the report. Thank you, Diane.
Thank you, Chair. The report before members this morning provides a summary of the information which you received during the presentation provided to members on the 13th of December. It also details next steps for members and for your consideration this morning. In relation to next steps, members will recall that when Cabinet asked Overview and Scrutiny to undertake this focused piece of work and consider the evidence base, Cabinet requested that Overview and Scrutiny respond with the recommendation back to Cabinet as to whether DCC needs to declare an ecological emergency. If I could therefore refer members to paragraph 10 of the report, having received evidence at both meetings in relation to the biodiversity decline, it is for members to now determine as to whether you recommend to Cabinet that an ecological emergency is declared, and should you recommend to declare, you may want to consider making further additional recommendations, with paragraph 11 of the report highlighting possible further recommendations for members to consider in next steps. Paragraph 13 of the report confirms that following today's meeting, a detailed report will be prepared that will summarise the evidence which has been provided during both sessions and also the key findings and recommendations. This report will be presented to this committee for consideration at a special meeting to be held in April, and following the consideration of that report by members, the report will then go to Cabinet for their consideration. If I could conclude, Chair, by asking members to consider whether, having received the evidence at both the December meeting and the meeting this morning, they would want to recommend to Cabinet that a declaration is made. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Diane.
Chair, could I suggest that unless members want to discuss the issue of declaration first, that we now have a show of hands, so that for the purpose of the final report, we've got an indication of members that are in favour of the declaration, just the sheer numbers.
Okay, members, if you're happy to show your hands if you wish. Jonathan. Thank you. Okay, thank you, members. You could. Okay, if I could now inform the committee, please, that we have 2 questions which have been received from Mr Owens, a member of the public, and I have agreed that they are presented to committee this morning as they relate to the particular review. I'm now going to pass over again to Diane, who can read out the question.
Okay, thank you, Chair. The first question from Mr Owens reads, should the Scrutiny Committee decide to recommend to Cabinet that Durham County Council declare an ecological emergency, which I hope it does, would the committee encourage those carrying out this work to engage with those County Durham residents and local conservation or nature groups willing to help, beyond just a consultation after a draft plan is produced, to not only to inform the drawing up of a plan or local nature recovery strategy, but also explore how local citizen scientists can help with the longer-term monitoring of the effectiveness of any proposed actions or interventions from that strategy or plan. This could also prove to be a helpful and economical way to improve the data gaps at a county level, particularly over time, that have been identified in the reports provided to the committee this morning. Mr Owen's second question, like climate change, the gradual degradation of the natural environment and the habitats of a number of endangered species of both flora and fauna is not fully appreciated by most citizens and residents in County Durham or in the rest of England. In part, this is due to the relatively slow rate of change over the years, but also due to the increasing numbers of folk in the current era preferring to be increasingly engrossed with virtual environments of television and of the multitude of platforms available on the internet, rather than engaging with outdoor activities and so possibly noticing these changes for themselves. Would the committee consider recommending that any strategy or plan incorporates effective communication to raise awareness of the issue, whilst also encouraging a healthier, more sustainable lifestyle, incorporating activities out of doors for all County Council residents, regardless of age? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Diane.
Chair, in relation to the questions posed by Mr Owens, I agree there's a need for wider community involvement in developing and assisting in the delivery of an action plan, as well as raising awareness of this issue with local communities. I therefore suggest that we need a recommendation to articulate the need for engagement and consultation with communities and special interest groups in developing and delivering an action plan, and in addition that we also consider how we can raise awareness of this issue across the community.
Okay, thank you. Oliver, can I ask if you would like to offer any comments, please, with regards to the questions?
Thank you, Chair. It's really sort of like very welcome the question itself, and hopefully you, Mr. Owens, would have gathered from the sort of the presentations and indeed the responses to the questions already that we're absolutely on the same page. The second question that he had was about the, sort of like, the basic awareness, and that is an essential sort of like prerequisite for anybody that you want to actually get engaged and supporting our efforts in relation through to wildlife and conservation, that actually they get that basic enjoyment and experience from the outdoors. And then the secondly was building from there in terms of the involvement. We've heard this morning about sort of a real sort of good variety of different schemes: Brightwater, Durham Woodland Revivals, Seascapes, the AONB partnership, etc., that are all doing really sort of like good things and offering opportunities for people to get involved. And of course, any future plans needs to build further on those platforms. I'd just finish really just with a note that from last week's cabinet there was a variety of investments that were highlighted, and those really do help to support the overall direction of travel. Indeed, now that members are going in support overall of a declaration. Those investments include some extra resource for nature reserve management, 2 extra officers there. They include some extra resource in relation through to engagement with volunteers and also outreach work, educational outreach work, particularly from our parks. And they also include a local nature recovery strategy officer to help pull together things and also offer a a corporate and county-wide approach to nature revival. I'm not saying that those are all perfect and complete and the sufficient resources. Quite clearly any future plans will help to shape the resource needs in the long term, but they will actually help to directly respond to those 2 issues as well that have been raised about the involvement and about awareness too.
Thank you, Oliver.
Thank you, Oliver. I just want to add to that as well. And in a sense, what we're doing here in declaration of an ecological emergency is about emphasising the gravity of that situation. It's about lifting this work from what was previously in the conservation box, it's nice and pretty to have, to putting it into the essential for future survival box. So making that point as a council is actually an educational thing in its own right. And I'd just like to come back to what Councillor Quinn was saying in terms of the difficulty of communicating these things at a local level. It's a re-emphasis of the approach we're taking to education, enabling people to understand that this isn't just about having pretty streets, it's also about the fundamental aspects of our future survival as well. So there's a need for a step change in the way we deliver education and the focus that, what that educational activity is trying to achieve. Chair, if I could just refer to members to the possible additional recommendations as identified in paragraph 11 of the report. I was wondering as to what members' views are in relation to these quite high-level recommendations, and would members consider adding a further recommendation to respond to the questions we had put from Mr Owens?
Thank you, Councillor Emmett. Does anybody have any questions in regards to what Councillor Emmett just proposed? Councillor Owens?
Do you mind repeating it? I think I support it, but it would be useful to hear it again.
Sorry, Councillor. If you could refer to the additional recommendations that are at paragraph 11 of the report, that's the key. Have a look at those recommendations. Are they adequate in terms of moving forwards? Do you think they should be added to? Councillor, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, no, you articulated a suggested additional recommendation a little while ago.
Sorry, that was in relation to the question that had been put from Mr Owens. So
I thought you were adding that to the... You were suggesting that we could add that to the recommendations.
I was suggesting
could you
that.
repeat what you said, is my point.
Yes, okay. Well, what I said was would we consider adding a further recommendation to respond to the questions from Mr Owens, which were essentially about education and awareness? Is that clear?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay. Members, if everybody has got no further questions, if I'd ask the committee for further indulgence, please, and refer members to the second recommendation in the report, which is on page 50. Sorry, Councillor Adams.
Sorry, Chair, obviously you're asking for questions there, but I would like to make some additions in terms of the next steps that the Vice Chair has just referred to, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course it is, Councillor Adams.
Thank you. Before I make those particular recommendations, obviously I think it's important for the committee and probably have realised that you are talking to the converted here in relation to what we are planning to do today, which is declare an ecological emergency. what has been put forward, not just in this meeting, but the previous meeting that we had, was the issues that we are experiencing, but we're experiencing globally as well. And the information that we have received has certainly expanded that knowledge and our experience that we do really need to declare an ecological emergency. But why have we actually had to do this? We've had to do it in some respects because we as human beings are quite selfish. And we've been selfish in the way that we've handled ourselves in this planet over the years by the actions that we've been taking. And as members have said, some of that is because through economic means, economic necessity in some respects, but actually ignoring the impact it's actually had on our environment. Because we have systematically destroyed our environment, we've destroyed our ecosystems, and ultimately, if we continue in the manner that we're doing, we're going to continue to destroy the planet. But we are destroying the planet from the perspective of our lives on the planet. The planet, as other members have already indicated, the planet will survive. If we disappear off the planet will continue, the ecosystems will improve, and everything will improve. Probably slightly different to the situation that we've got, but it'll be human beings that will actually disappear off the planet. So therefore, we have got to look after the planet and the ecosystems to make sure that we survive. But we've got to do that hand in hand, and not as an isolated process. So, Chair, obviously I've rattled on there in relation to what I wanted to say as a general statement. But I identified that we do clearly need to identify an ecological emergency, but also we need to have a strategy for applying that emergency, as it says in the additional report, as very similar to the climate emergency that we declared back in 2019, and follow a similar process, but also to point out a similar declaration that we made in terms to single-use plastics that we carried out some years ago, where Oliver will recall we set up a task force to look at that within the local authority. And I think that's something that we would need to look at in terms of the ecological emergency as well, that task force within the council to tackle our processes, our procedures that we carry out in this authority. So with that in mind, Chair, I would like to also propose that we make sure that we integrate the best ecological practice that's available at this moment in time to each of the services within the council. And that also includes, within every report that is produced by officers, that make sure that a consideration has been made with regards to an ecological emergency, just as we do with the climate emergency. Also, to further look at, obviously, expanding the work that we do with partners, whether that is the County Durham Environmental Partnership, whether it is the community, whether it is residents, but also businesses. Businesses don't seem to be mentioned at this moment in time. And obviously the officers are already indicating working with agriculture or farmers, etc. as well. This really needs a broad conversation and awareness through a whole host of individuals and organisations. And then the next step from that would be is that I think we also need to recommend to Cabinet that objectives need to be set for the future and the long-term aspirations of this council. We've already identified that Oliver's just identified that there are dedicated officers being built into the medium-term financial plan, but I think it's also important that we ensure that we have dedicated funding and dedicated resourcing built into the medium-term financial plan. Otherwise, if we don't build that in dedicated funding, these things that we are talking about here today will not be achieved. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Some really important comments made there, which will get included in the report that will go, the review report that will go forward. Okay, Councillor Quinn, did you want to come in as well?
Yes, please. Thanks, Chair. I would just like to add on the recommendations that we have an education and communication strategy and budget. I think that's paramount. It's obvious that this is one of the things, in my opinion. Was that included? You said about answering his question. This is more to take the report to Cabinet. Are they the same thing?
Yeah, I think you've essentially just requested that we have a further recommendation in relation to the educational rollout of this, and that's what that question related to, so I think that caps that off. I would also just make the point that if you want to sort of break this down in your head, there's what the council does in terms of its own estate, and there's how we can encourage the wider community to engage, work with us on all of this work, two elements to this work. So if we just quickly look at those paragraph 11 recommendations, the first step is really to conduct this cross-council review to identify how we can modify and improve our own services, and also, of course, how much that will all cost, so that we can actually make financial recommendations in terms of the MTFP as well.
You can turn back. Have we got any more members who wish to ask questions or make comments? No? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, if I could just ask for the committee's further indulgence, please, and refer members to the second recommendation in your report on page 54 concerning the declaration. Can I propose with your agreement, members, that we prepare an interim report to be sent to Cabinet for consideration at their April meeting, advising them of the committee's decision that Durham County Council declare an ecological emergency, and that we intend to send the full review report to Cabinet in June, following the agreement of the report by members of this committee at a special Environment and Sustainable Communities Overview and Scrutiny Community to be held in April. Thank you, members. Okay. Thank you very much, members. Okay, I would like to conclude by thanking the officers from the service, Oliver and Stuart, and our partners from the Environment and Climate Change Partnership, Chris, and we hope that Jim's okay, for supporting this review, and we would also like to thank members of this committee for your contribution during these two special meetings. Okay. Members, I'll move on to item number 7, any such business. I have not been informed of any other business, therefore that concludes today's business. Thank you all for your attendance. Sorry, beg your pardon.
I'm sorry, Chair. I just wanted to. I have heard from Jim, and he wanted me to pass on his apologies and to all of the members. He's had to take his son to hospital because he's hurt his ankle, so it is the only thing that would have kept him from being with us, because believe me, he does think this is a very important meeting.
Thank you for that, Chris. If you can pass on our best wishes to his son, I hope he's okay. Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so we haven't been informed of any other business, therefore that concludes today's business, and thank you for your attendance. Can I please remind members to stay seated until the IT broadcast is finished? Thank you.